It's a pleasure to be back at BPS. I was just telling my wife last night, I asked her, she's a British psychologist, did you ever in your wildest dreams imagine that we'd be together at BPS with my keynoting BPS? And she said, you're not in my wildest dreams. So, be that as it may. So first, the 5-minute summary of where I am and my view, not David's view, of the evolution of my thought. I grew up in a psychology that was dominated by the Freud and Schopenhauer view that the best you could ever do in life was not to be miserable, not to suffer. So what psychology was supposed to be about was the elimination of suffering. And indeed, the first half of my professional career was about that. As David mentioned, I worked on learned helplessness, depression, mental illness. I became a clinical psychologist. But I was struck by what I call the 60% barrier. I've written 5 editions of abnormal psychology. And to summarize the outcome literature in the stuff I know about, basically you get for either pharmacology or psychotherapy, about 60% of people responding, and about 40% of people respond to a placebo. So the effects of therapy, to my dismay as a therapist, are just small, taken overall. This turned me to the question of prevention, that could we be more cost-effective about human suffering if we took the stuff we knew in psychology and we did it early, before people fell off the cliff. So we worked 30 years ago on building optimism, since we had found that the people in my laboratory who never became helpless were optimists. So we wondered, well, what if you taught people optimism early in life? And we found roughly when we did that with middle school kids aged 10 to 12, that it roughly halved the level of moderate to severe depressive symptoms as they went through puberty. And so that was kind of my lesson 1, that building well-being early in life buffers against the mental illnesses. So if we really care cost-effectively about the mental illnesses, we're talking about education. And it seemed much more effective than the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So I then turned to the question of the generalization of optimism, which was positive psychology, both to buffer against mental illness, but also to increase human well-being in its own right. And people in this field found that when you gave non-disordered people the skills of well-being, that it increased happiness, it decreased mental illness, it increased productivity, and it had a positive impact on physical health. And that was lesson number 2 for me, that well-being itself increases physical health, productivity, happiness, and it can be taught and measured. So my conclusion, where I am today, is that building and measuring well-being buffers against mental illness, it increases health, productivity, and happiness, and it can be taught on a massive basis, and it can be measured. And so my conclusion is that it's a plausible personal goal for each of you to have more well-being in life, and for your patients as well. But most importantly for me these days, it's a plausible political goal. That is, the notion that a nation, that the UK could have more well-being than it does now, should be an end of politics, in my view. And this is a political speech, and I'll finish it, but it's not about the left or the right. So left versus right, as I understand it, is who does it? Is it done by government or is it done by private people and companies. This is about it. It says that it is not about wealth. It's not about military conquest. It's about the increase of well-being. So that's a summary of the speech. That's the why now. So if I had stood up 30 years ago before BPS and suggested to you that psychologists and politicians and teachers should be interested in building well-being, you really should have walked out. And there were kind of three reasons for that. There are no measures of well-being, no theory of well-being, and all the interventions that we had were about decreasing suffering as opposed to building well-being. But something's happened in 30 years, and so I'm going to talk about what is well-being. I'm going to suggest there are 5 elements to well-being, where an element is what free people who are not suffering choose in life. Positive emotion, P, E, engagement, being in flow, being one with the music, R, good relationships, M, meaning and purpose, and A, accomplishment. So that's what, for me, the field of positive psychology is about. Then I'm going to talk about the measurement of well-being. There's been a revolution in measurement in the last 3 or 4 years. So I gave questionnaires all my life. And on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the conditions of my life are abysmal, and 10 is the conditions of my life are ideal, how happy are you right now?
10, you're starting right.
10. Okay, well that's perfect. And what we find out from questionnaires is we get some information, but people guess your hypothesis and respond to it. They lie, they reputation manage and the like. And indeed, we found this out in the Brexit referendum and in the Trump election recently, that questionnaires really don't work very well. And there's another way of proceeding, which is less obtrusive, less reactive, and larger scale. And it's the big data revolution. So I'm going to tell you about that. Then I'm going to ask the question, can you actually be happier tomorrow? Can your clients be happy? How many of you are clinical psychologists? Okay, good. Can the people you work with be happier, have more PERMA? And since I spent most of my first half of my life working on misery, I was often asked, well, why don't you work on happiness? And the reason I didn't work on happiness was a study of lottery winners in Illinois, 14 of them who won $1 million. And people decided they would follow their life, their happiness. And what basically happened is for the first 3 months after you win $1 million, you get happier. But then after 3 months, you go back down to your usual curmudgeonly level. And so I concluded that happiness, well-being, was the froth on the cappuccino, but the espresso was misery, and that's what I was going to stick to. And that turns out to be false. So it turns out you can actually have more PERM&A, and there have been discoveries about that, so I'm going to talk about that. And I'll give some examples of this, one for positive emotion, one for more engagement, one for better relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And then I'm going to say something about the invisible hand, the Adam Smith argument, that I actually think most interventions for building well-being are not these general ones, but they're local. And I'll try to do that. Then I'm going to talk about the positive education, the question of, can you take all this stuff to the classroom? And if you do, what are the consequences for the well-being of students? And what are the consequences for the traditional goals of education, literacy, numeracy, science? And there's some very important new data on that, which come from Bhutan, Mexico, and Peru, the last study being with 700,000 kids. I'll tell you about that. Then I'll mention comprehensive soldier fitness, in which well-being is taught in the entire United States Army to the families of the soldiers as well as the soldiers. And finally, I'll talk about the politics of happiness. So that's what's on. So as I said, 30 years ago, this was all nonsense. No theory of well-being, no measures of well-being, and all of our interventions were about the relief of suffering, not building stuff above zero. And I should say something that may not be obvious to you, that happiness and well-being are not the absence of misery. That as a therapist, sometimes I would do decent work, and by the end of therapy, her anger, her sadness, her anxiety were close to zero. And I was taught that when I did that kind of work, she'd be happy. But I didn't get happy patients when that happened. I got empty patients. And that's because the building of positive emotion, of good relationships, of being engaged, of having meaning in life, of accomplishing things are completely different from getting rid of sadness and anxiety and anger and psychosis. Those stand in the way, but they don't obviate these things, and not having them does not guarantee well-being. So it opens the way for a field of what's above zero in life. And our mission was eliminating the negative stuff. And I think I'm saying if we were asymptotically good at that, we'd get to zero. And that's, of course, what Freud and Schopenhauer told us about. And so for me, my theory of well-being is that there are 5 elements of well-being. The first is the smiley face, happiness, good cheer, merriment, and the like. But the reason positive psychology doesn't end with positive emotion is, first, it's highly heritable. It's more than 50% heritable, and that means at any given time, half the people in the world are not smiling and not merry and not happy. And when you go about trying to change it, it turns out you only have between 5 and 15% leeway for changing merriment and smiling. It's sort of like your weight, that people can learn to live in the upper part of what I think is a genetically dictated envelope of weight or well-being, but you don't change curmudgeons into cheerleaders. That's not possible. And so I began to ask, well, what are the other things we care about other than smiling and feeling good? What do we choose? And the second for me was flow, engagement, being one with the music. Yeah. I think about 70% of you right now are engaged in this talk. You're in flow. The other 30% of you are having sexual fantasies, we find. So we're very interested in what produces flow and how you can have more. The R is good relationships. We are social creatures. And the M is meaning and purpose in life. And I think human beings are ineluctably want to be part of something larger, to belong to and serve something larger. And I'm part of a group of people who work in evolutionary biology who think that there's much more than the self to evolution that groups have been selected for. And in fact, human beings have been selected for a whole set of emotions like love, which had proved a huge evolutionary edge. And finally, people want to accomplish things for their own sake: achievement, accomplishment, mastery, and competence. So that's the theory. It says we should be building those things over and above getting rid of the disorders. I'm all for getting rid of the disorders. We definitely want to continue doing that, but that's only half our job. And it turns out each of these things in PERMA is measurable and each is teachable. So let me talk about measurement. About 6 years ago, I was the keynote speaker at a Google meeting, and I told them I wanted to get together with the Google Earth people because I wanted to measure the well-being of the world in real time and not by questionnaire. And the way that could be done, and this is what my group's been doing for the last 5 years, is PERMA has a lexicon. In English, it turns out there are 50,000 words and phrases which are perma and anti-perma words. So we literally comb through tens of millions of tweets and Facebook statuses, and we look for the deployment of the perma and anti-perma words. And so the lesson here is that if you're interested in public policy or change in a patient, you can ask, how are you feeling right now? But much better is to look at the social media and see if that changes in the appropriate direction. So if you build a library in Manchester and you want to know, does this increase engagement? What you want to look at is the 2,000 engagement and anti-engagement words in Manchester as opposed to Birmingham. So let me show you what I mean by this. So we try to measure the psychological states and traits of giant populations, and it's almost free. So this is a cute slide. It's 40,000 women, and it's a statistical slide. So it tells you the larger the word, the more it distinguishes women from men. So women shopping, excited, yummy, hubby. Basically, we can take a tweet or a Facebook status now and identify with 92% accuracy of whether or not it's a man or a woman who has sent it. So this is what women goes through their head, what they tweet about and Facebook about. You probably want to know what men do. That's what men do. So if you want to know what's going through the head of men and what distinguishes them from women, they're very different. It's fuck, wishes, Xbox, warfare, government, and the like. I've spent a lot of my life doing personality tests, like the Big Five. And so this is 80,000 people. And this is what people who score high in neuroticism, what distinguishes them from people who score low in neuroticism. Depressed, alone, hate, crap, any more, dead. Whereas healthy people, psychologically, basketball, beautiful day, beach, chilling, blessed. I'm not preaching here. This is the language of healthy people versus neurotic people. And so one of the things we're very interested in doing is measuring PERMA in whole nations or whole corporations or in individuals. And again, this is basically the language of people with high PERMA, and the dimensions are separate. You can measure these things separately. We measure life satisfaction, this question of how happy are you now. That's the language of people who are high in life satisfaction. And we're interested in death. I've always been interested in the psychosomatics of physical illness. So we asked the question, we got from the CDC the death rate from cardiovascular disease county by county in the United States. This is 140 million tweets is the database for this. It's a huge study. And so this is the county by county in the United States, the death rate. So if you live on Long Island or Manhattan, on the very high death rate from cardiovascular illness. As traditional epidemiology, we look at race, marriage, obesity, blood pressure as predictors of cardiovascular death. But we wondered if you could predict this from tweets. And remember, it's the young people who are tweeting and people my age who are dying. And so we were surprised to find that the tweet model correlated about 0.67, huge, very robust for death. And then we played this off against traditional risk factors. And so this is for the 10 traditional risk factors for cardiovascular death, that's the percent accuracy for each one. So race, gender, marriage are predictors. And then if you add smoking, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, income, and education, you get up to about more than 30% prediction of cardiovascular death, county by county. Twitter alone, without any of these, takes you to almost 40%. So what the kids are tweeting about is a robust predictor, a more robust predictor than putting the 10 leading risk factors together. That's Twitter alone. So all the predictors plus Twitter takes you above 40%. I see Jamie Pennybaker sitting here. Jamie, I wanted to say what we work with your model as well, what the difference is between Luke as predictors and this stuff as predictors. So pronoun use, which I think is highly predictive of things that interest both of us, is not a theory of why. This is a theory of why. This tells you, when you look at the counties, that's the counties that are high in heart disease. Hate, fuck, boy, bored, annoying. This points you in a theory of what might be changed psychologically. So I think that's the basic difference in our work these days. This is the counties that have very low in heart disease, great folks, conference, office, hour, and the like. So the bottom line from that is that PERMA is measurable. It's measurable either by questionnaire, and for those of you who use questionnaires, I have a website called AuthenticHappiness.org. It's free. 5 million people have registered at it. It's got all the leading tests of PERMA on it, so you can use it with your patients yourself and find out where, compared to British women, your sense of humor stands relative to British women and the like. So you can measure things by questionnaire, but the future is measuring things by big data. Now, big data has its artifacts, it's got reputation management and the like, but it's less gameable, it's much less expensive, less reactive and less obtrusive than questionnaires. So that leads to the question, can you have more of this stuff? Is it teachable? So we began more than 20 years ago to look at, from the Buddha to Tony Robbins, there have been about 200 suggestions about what makes people happier. So we're interested in which one of these are bogus, which are placebo, and which are for real. So, and I spent a lot of my life before that testing psychotherapies and drugs for effectiveness. And as you know, the gold standard is random assignment placebo-controlled testing. So I asked, could you test the alleged boosters of well-being in random assignment placebo-controlled testing? So basically the methodology here is on my website, every so often I'd put up a link called exercises, and if you go to that link, it says Professor Seligman wants to find out what really lowers depression, what really makes people happier. So if you're willing to do this, you're going to get an exercise to do for a week. It could be a placebo, it could be for real, and then we're going to bug you for 6 months, measuring all the things that interest us. So the stuff I'm going to, and it turns out there are about 10 exercises that actually 6 months later decrease depression and increase life satisfaction over and above placebos. So I'll just take you to a couple of them. So one is every night before I recommend this to you if you haven't done it. Before you go to sleep, write down 3 things that went well today and why they went well. Don't have to be big things, a nice sunset, a good lecture, and the like. When you do this in random assignment placebo-controlled testing, you find a couple of things. First, 6 months later, people who do this exercise have lower depression and higher life satisfaction. And secondly, it's addicting. That is, unlike psychotherapy, unlike dieting, this is fun to do. So people keep doing it. And that's very important for maintenance. Signature strengths. How many of you have been to the website and taken the signature strengths test? Okay, I recommend it to you. About 4 million people have taken it. Very, very well validated. And what you find is it gives you your 5 highest strengths, not talents. These are things like gratitude, social intelligence, kindness, fairness, and the like. And so if this were an overnight seminar, you all would have taken the signature strengths test, and then I would do the following exercise with you. Close your eyes. Imagine, call up to mind the something you have to do at least once a week at work that you don't like doing. Okay, open your eyes. Now, your exercise would be to do that thing that you don't like doing using your highest strength next week. And so, for example, one of my students was a waitress, and she's working her way through graduate school. She hated being a waitress, heavy trays, being patronized and ignored by customers. And her job was to take her highest strength and recraft waitressing, to use her highest strength more. So her highest strength was social intelligence. So she decided that she would make the encounter with her the highlight of every customer's evening. Now, obviously she failed at that objectively, but what she did was to put what was best inside of her on offer. And trays became lighter and tips became bigger. So in general, 6 months after doing this exercise, people who do it have higher life satisfaction and lower depression. Relationships. How many of you are marital therapists or sex therapists? Oh, I'm the only one, I guess. Okay. Well, I've taught marital therapy and sex therapy, and as you wouldn't know, except unless you do it, this is the worst form of psychotherapy to do. Its statistical outcomes are abysmal. People are lying to you. They're lying to each other. The only thing that I've ever done that works is sometimes you can get them to form an alliance against you. And that actually helps. And the problem about marital therapy, as I've learned it and taught it, was essentially you teach if you look at a marriage manual, which is what you teach out of, you teach couples to fight better. So you don't want them to have the same damn fight every day about something different. Basically what you're trying to do is to take insufferable marriages and make them barely tolerable. And that's really not positive psychotherapy from my point of view. So about a decade ago, a group of California positive marriage counselors said, let's not look at how people fight, let's look at how they celebrate together and see if we can change that. And so here's the scenario. Your spouse comes home from work and she's been promoted. And the question, what do you say to her? And no one in this audience would do the right thing. So you would do what I did until I read this literature. So I did passive constructive, which is congratulations, Mandy, you deserve it. That has no effect on anything at all. Now, I've worked with more than 30,000 drill sergeants, and drill sergeants are as you imagine them to be. They are really tough, they're merciless critics. And when their wife comes home from work and she's been promoted, he says something like, you know what tax bracket that's going to put us into? So that's active destructive. Many people do passive destructive, which is what's for dinner. And the only thing that works, and I had to learn it, and we teach this now all the time, is active constructive. So in active constructive, basically, you're trying to put her in touch, in better touch with her success and why it came about. It takes time and it's hard work. It doesn't come naturally. So she comes home and you say, she's been promoted. I read the report that you wrote on the pension plan for the company, and that's the best fiscal report that I've seen in my 25 years of business. Then you'd relive the experience. Exactly where were you when your boss told you had been promoted? She tells you. Exactly what did he say? And she goes verbatim. Now, what do you think your real strengths are that got you promoted? And you get her to talk about that. And how could you use those strengths more with the kids and in church? And let's open a bottle of champagne. When you do that, sex gets better, love and commitment get better, and divorce rate goes down. So this is an important new thing that I certainly didn't know, and that I now try my best to do. And it's not just about marriage. So how many of you teach? Okay, well, I used to, when I graded papers, I would cover them with red ink. It's all the stuff that was wrong. And when I did this, I realized you really have to tell your students what they're doing right and get them to read. So now I have a lot of blue ink where it's just the right word you picked here, and that's a beautiful sentence. And you want to adjust that ratio. That's basically what active constructive is about. Meaning and purpose, belonging to and building and serving something bigger than you. We teach this to our students routinely. One of my, I assign students either to do something fun next week or to do something philanthropic and to write up what happened. And what you find really pretty remarkable, I had no idea it would occur. So one of my students, her 8-year-old nephew called her from on the phone. He needed to be tutored in fractions. She spent 2 hours on the phone tutoring him in fractions. And she said, after that, the whole day went better. I was mellow. I could listen to people. And then one of my business students said, I'm in business school because I want to earn a lot of money. And I want to earn money because money brings security, it brings control, and it brings happiness. But I was astonished to find out that I was happier helping another person than I was shopping. So you can teach meaning as well. And I'm not going to have time to talk about grit, but Angela Duckworth and I are quite interested in self-discipline and grit as predictors of success. And it turns out, basically, to summarize a large literature, self-discipline is about twice as important as talent in predicting success. So that's 2/3 of what I wanted to say. Now the question arises, so PERM is measurable, it's buildable. It's buildable in individuals. And now I want to talk about positive education, which is the question, can you do all this stuff on a massive basis? Does this have to be in the consulting room? And the answer is you can. There's an organization called IPEN, International Positive Education Network. It's international. There's a meeting Friday in London of the group. And the question that we started teaching well-being in school. And we wound up talking with principals and superintendents and ultimately with ministers of education. And they said, quite rightly, education's a zero-sum game. You only have a given amount of money and a given amount of time. You're saying we should teach kids to be happy? Well, our job is to teach science and math and literature. And what, are you going to cut science out? What are you going to subtract? So the question was, are these synergistic or subtractive? And so Alejandro Adler, my student and now colleague, has gone around the world looking at the effect of these programs both on well-being in controlled settings and on traditional academic achievement. So he first did it in Bhutan with about 8,000 students. Basically, the way this works is the teachers go on a retreat with our trainers for about a week. They learn how to do PERMA in their own lives, and then they learn how to integrate it into their teachers and their manuals for this. And he came back, there are 7 control schools, came back 15 months later and 2 years later. And importantly, the happiness, EPOC is a PERMA measure for kids, went up. But most importantly, Bhutan has national standardized exams like UK does. The kids in the schools that learned well-being had about 4 months advance in literacy, numeracy, and science. So they actually got better. These are synergistic. He then, he's Mexican, he repeated this in Mexico with 70,000 kids and the same results. Standardized test scores went up, and then went to Peru with 694,000 kids, 700 schools, and again found that the kids get happier and the standardized test scores go up. The effects are smaller as you get larger groups because it's no longer just my trainers. We have to train trainers, and we have to now, in Peru, train trainers of trainers of trainers. So it's diluted but still there. And the United States Army asked similar questions, and the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, George Casey, called me to the Pentagon about 8 years ago and said, suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder, panic, drug abuse, depression. What does positive psychology say about that, Dr. Seligman? And I said, sir, the reaction of human beings to awful events like combat is Gaussian. And you've just described the left-hand side of the curve. People who have their lives ruined by combat. And I see you spend $10 billion a year treating them. You should continue to do that. But there are 2 things that are very important. The middle of the curve, reaction to combat, is called resilience. And what this means is people go through a tough time in combat by and large, but 3 months later, they're back where they were psychologically and physically. And most importantly, on the right-hand side of the curve is post-traumatic growth, which is statistically just as frequent as post-traumatic stress disorder, but measurably it means there are very often people who go through terrible time in combat, but a year later are stronger psychologically and physically than they were to begin with. So my recommendation, sir, is to move the whole curve to the right. And whereupon he did several remarkable things. So David, unlike what you do and what I do, when I have a good idea, I try to convince my colleagues to do it. He ordered that from that day forward, positive psychology and resilience would be taught to the entire United States Army, and he allocated $140 million to do it. And so since that time, every month, 108, oh, he also said, the general staff has read what you've done in schools, and we see you go to schools and you teach PERMA to the teachers, and then you measure the effects in the students. Well, that's the Army model. We've got 40,000 teachers in the Army, the drill sergeants. So your job, Dr. Seligman, will be to train all the drill sergeants in well-being, and they'll train the 1 million American soldiers. And we'll measure it. And this is the most recent measure I have. We've lost control groups because it's now so popular in the Army. It's a regulation. Everyone has to do it. But at the time in which everyone didn't have to do it, we were able to measure the effects on substance abuse. We found that it roughly halved drug addiction after deployment, and the effects on PTSD, depression, and panic significantly lowers them as well. And for those of you who want to learn this stuff in a deep way that can use it, the University of Pennsylvania has essentially created a 5-course specialization on the MOOC. I think it's like $75. And it has, you can take 5 courses in positive psychology now and learn these techniques. So this brings me to my conclusion. Let me find the right way to say this. We know a lot about the relationship. Government is run by economists these days, and it's geared around increasing wealth. And we know a lot about the relationship of wealth to life satisfaction, and it is under conditions of poverty, below the safety net, well-being goes up linearly with wealth. But above the safety net, where all of you people are, it's powerfully curvilinear. And what that means is that increasing wealth, once you're making, in the UK, about £50,000 a year, does not bring much in the way of increased well-being. You have to do other stuff, like spend time with family and friends and in leisure to get the well-being. And it turns out that people vote their well-being. This is brand new, and I'm going to show you, I think this is the first time I've shown this data. And I just heard a Brexit story, which is similar. So let me tell you about people voting their well-being. So what I'm trying to say is that increasing well-being decreases mental illness, it increases happiness, productivity, and health. But in addition, if you're a politician, here's what you should know. This is data of Richard Laird's and Emmanuel Denev's of 135 EU elections since 1970. And what you're looking at here is the margin of victory for the incumbent. And you can parcel these things out of each other. So you can look at macroeconomics, unemployment, household income, and the like, and that accounts for about 8% of the variance in incumbent victories. But the EU has, since 1970, measured life satisfaction as well. And that accounts for another additional 8% of the variance. So in the EU, for the last 45 years, people have been voting well-being as well as their pocketbook. We asked the question about the Trump election as well, since we do county-by-county analyses. So the question was, how do economics and well-being account for the Trump's margin of victory or loss? So again, what we found here was that if you look at the economics, median household income and unemployment, that again accounts for about 8% of the variance in the Trump victory, with people who aren't doing well voting for Trump economically. And then if you look at life satisfaction today, that accounted for about another 8%, sort of just like the EU. But the big effect was, what do you think your life satisfaction is going to be in 5 years? That accounted for 30% of the variance. That is, people who thought their life satisfaction was going to be bad in 5 years were the Trump voters. And I just talked to Paul Dolan today from LSE, and he said they found something quite similar with Brexit as well. What this says, and we call this, it's not the economy, stupid, that people are voting their well-being. So let me conclude. A psychology that was about alleviating misery, I'm all for, and it comes from the view that life is a vale of tears. But you have to be blinded by ideology now not to know that life is better objectively now than it's ever been in the past. You name the statistic: life expectancy, morbidity, mortality, malnutrition, women's rights, pollutions, it's all better. So the question is, psychology and I think politics have to not only be about the alleviation of suffering, but about the stuff that's above zero, about the building of well-being. And I think there is a scientific, secular, and religious vacuum now about the future. And the suggestion underlying this is that the building of human flourishing is a big enough idea to fill the religious and secular and political vacuum. And most of human history has been pretty miserable. And the question is, do people ever turn to well-being? And the best example we have of this is Florence of the 1460s. So, as you know, Florence became enormously wealthy in the mid-15th century due to Medici banking genius, for the most part. And Cosimo the Elder said, okay, what are we going to do with all this money, with this surplus that we've created? And there were open meetings about it, and the generals said, let's conquer the peninsula. But what won under Cosimo the Elder was beauty and science. So Florence decided to invest its surplus in what we, 200 years later, called the Renaissance. Now, I'm suggesting not that we should go out and do sculpture, but rather that Britain, the United States, the European Union, Australia, much of the world is at a Florentine moment. The question is, what are we going to do with the bounty that we've created? And what I've tried to say today is, my vision for the human future is that we will devote this bounty to the building of human flourishing, to the building of PERMA. That we can measure well-being, we can build it in schools, we can build it in the consulting room, and I guess I want to conclude by telling you why I think we should do this in the deepest way. This is from a book by Kim Stanley Robinson, who's a science fiction writer. You don't want to read this book, it's a boring book. It's called The Years of Rice and Salt. And it postulates that the plague wiped out everyone in the West. And so civilization grew up through Islam and Buddhism and Confucianism in the East. And in the 19th century, a Raja called the Kerala in India is interested in technology, the building of human flourishing, and he recruits engineers to build human flourishing. And here's the speech he gives. He says to them, we will go out into the world and plant gardens and orchards to the horizon. We'll build roads through the mountains and across the deserts, and terrace the mountains and irrigate the deserts, until there will be garden everywhere and plenty for all, and there'll be no more empires or kingdoms, no more slavery, no more usury, no more property, no more taxes, no more rich, no more poor, no killing or maiming or torture or execution, no more jailers and no more prisoners, no more generals, soldiers, armies, or navies, no more patriarchy, no more caste, no more hunger, no more suffering than what life brings us for being born and having to die. And then we will find out for the very first time what kind of creature we really are.